The wedding of Julian Thorne and Tiffany St. Clair was meant to be the social event of the decade, a merger of billions, sealed with a diamond the size of a quail's egg. 600 guests sat in the humid heat of the Hamptons, waiting for the I-do's. But the most important person in that crowd wasn't the bride in her $50,000 Vera Wang gown. It was the woman in the back row, the one wearing a faded grey dress, the one the security guards almost threw out. Everyone ignored her. They laughed at her worn-out shoes. They looked through her as if she were a ghost. But when Julian Thorne looked up from the altar, he didn't see his bride. He saw her. And when the billionaire groom leaned into the microphone and whispered her name, the silence that followed was louder than any scream. This is the story of the day the truth finally came out. The sun beat down mercilessly on the manicured lawns of the Thorne estate in Southampton. It was June 14th, a date that had been etched into the calendars of New York's elite for over a year. The air smelled of expensive lilies, salty ocean breeze, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. Guests arrived in a steady stream of Rolls-Royces and Bentleys, their tires crunching softly on the white gravel of the driveway. It was a sea of pastel silks, linen suits, and hats broad enough to block out the sun. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved like synchronized swimmers through the crowd, offering flutes of chilled Dom Perignon. Among this kaleidoscope of wealth and pretension, Natalie Vance stood out like a bruise. She stood near the back of the seating arrangement, under the shade of a weeping willow, trying to make herself as small as possible. She wasn't wearing silk or linen. She wore a simple, charcoal grey cotton dress that had seen better days. The hem was slightly frayed, and her shoes, sensible black flats, were scuffed at the toes. She clutched a small, worn leather handbag to her chest, as if it were a shield. "Can you believe the nerve?" The whisper came from a woman a few feet away. Natalie didn't need to look up to know who it was. It was Mrs. Gable, a socialite who had never worked a day in her life. She was speaking to her daughter, a girl who looked like a carbon copy of the bride, Tiffany. "Who let the help stand in the guest area?" The daughter giggled, snapping her gum. "She looks like she's here to clean the toilets, not witness a union of empires." "Don't look at her, darling," Mrs. Gable sniffed, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "If you make eye contact, she might ask for a donation. It's gauche. Security really should have been tighter." Natalie heard every word. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not from the sun, but from a familiar, burning shame. She kept her eyes fixed on the white altar set up at the end of the aisle. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She wasn't here to beg. She was here because, 15 years ago, a boy with sad eyes had made her promise. "If I ever get married, Natalie, you have to be there. Promise me. Even if we hate each other, even if the world is falling apart, you have to be there to make sure I'm doing the right thing." She had promised. And Natalie Vance never broke a promise, even if the boy who asked for it had grown up to be Julian Thorne, the ruthless CEO of Thorne Enterprises, a man who hadn't spoken to her in a decade. "Excuse me." A shadow fell over her. Natalie looked up to see a large man in a black security suit. He wasn't wearing an earpiece. He looked more like a bouncer than a wedding guard. "This area is for guests with invitations," the guard rumbled. "Staff entrance is around the back, near the catering trucks." Natalie swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "I'm not staff. I'm a guest." The guard looked her up and down, his lip curling in a sneer. "Let me see your invitation." Natalie's hands trembled as she opened her bag. She pulled out the heavy cream envelope with gold leaf embossing. It was real. She held it out. The guard took it, squinting at the name. "Natalie Vance. Table. 84. He scoffed. "Table 84 is in the overflow tent. You're practically in the parking lot. But fine, just stay out of the photos. The bride gave strict instructions. No eyesores in the background." "I understand," Natalie whispered, taking the invitation back. "And try to look a little less." He waved a hand at her vague direction. "Depressing. It's a wedding." He walked away, leaving her standing in the dust. Natalie took a deep breath. She could do this. She just had to survive the ceremony, watch Julian say, "I do," and then she could leave. She could go back to her small apartment in Queens, back to her double shifts at the diner, back to the life that the Thorne family had ensured was her only option. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. The string quartet began to play Pachelbel's Canon in D. The groom was coming. Julian Thorne walked out from the side entrance of the estate house. He was devastatingly handsome. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, emphasizing his broad shoulders. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that had graced the cover of Forbes and GQ alike. But as he walked toward the altar, Natalie noticed something the cameras wouldn't catch. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw was set so tight, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He didn't look like a man in love. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He took his place at the altar, turning to face the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd. He nodded politely to the senators and the hedge fund managers. He smiled tightly at his mother, a woman with eyes like ice chips. And then his gaze drifted to the back. Natalie held her breath. "Don't see me," she prayed. "Please don't see me." His eyes swept past the willow tree. He didn't pause. He looked right through her, as if she were part of the scenery. Natalie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A pang of disappointment hit her chest, sharp and sudden. "Of course he doesn't recognize you," she told herself. "You aren't the girl he knew anymore. That girl wore sunshine and laughter. You wear exhaustion and grey cotton." Then the music changed. The dramatic chords of the wedding march began. Everyone stood up. Phones were raised, necks craned. At the top of the aisle, framed by a massive arch of white roses, stood Tiffany St. Clair. She was undeniably beautiful. Her blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves. The dress was a masterpiece of lace and crystals, tight at the bodice and exploding into a cloud of tulle at the bottom. She smiled, a triumphant, predatory smile. She gripped her father's arm, Mr. Robert St. Clair, the man who had destroyed Natalie's father, and began her walk. As Tiffany passed the rows of guests, she soaked in the adoration. But as she neared the back, her eyes flicked to the side. She saw Natalie. For a split second, the bride's perfect smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. She mouthed something, too quick for anyone else to catch. But Natalie read the lips perfectly. "Get out." Natalie didn't move. She stood her ground, gripping her bag until her knuckles turned white. She would not leave. Not until the promise was kept. The ceremony was agonizingly long. The officiant, a bishop with a booming voice, spoke at length about the sanctity of marriage, the merging of two great families, and the divine destiny that had brought Julian and Tiffany together. Natalie felt nauseous. Destiny hadn't brought them together. Corporate greed had. It was an open secret in the financial districts that Thorne Enterprises needed the St. Clair shipping routes to survive the next quarter, and the St. Clairs needed the Thorne liquidity to cover up a massive embezzlement scandal that was moments away from leaking. This wasn't a marriage, it was a merger acquisition with a cake. "Do you, Julian Edward Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the bishop asked. The silence that followed stretched a second too long. Natalie watched Julian's back. He was stiff as a board. The wind rustled the leaves of the willow tree above her, casting dancing shadows on the ground. "Julian," the bishop prompted gently. Julian cleared his throat. His voice cracked. He coughed and started again, his voice mechanical. "I do." A ripple of relieved laughter went through the crowd. "And do you, Tiffany Marie St. Clair, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Tiffany said instantly, her voice loud and clear, ringing with victory. "Then, by the power vested in me—" "Wait." The word wasn't shouted. It was spoken softly, but the microphone caught it. It was Julian. The bishop paused. "Is something wrong, my son?" Julian wasn't looking at the bishop. He wasn't looking at Tiffany. He was looking down at his hands. He slowly uncurled his fists. He took a deep breath, and for the first time that day, his shoulders dropped. The tension seemed to leave his body, replaced by a strange, calm resolve. "The ring," Julian said. "I forgot the ring." The best man, a slick-haired banker named Chad, patted his pockets frantically. No, I gave it to you, Julian. It's in your pocket." "Not that ring," Julian said. He turned away from the altar. A murmur of confusion swept through the 600 guests. Tiffany's smile froze. She reached out and grabbed Julian's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit fabric. "Julian, what are you doing? The cameras are rolling." He gently but firmly peeled her hand off his arm. "I know, Tiffany." He began to walk. He didn't walk back down the aisle the way he came. He stepped off the raised platform and onto the grass. He walked past his mother, who looked as if she were about to faint. He walked past the senators and the CEOs. The crowd parted for him, confusion turning to shock. Where was he going? Natalie watched him coming. She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's leaving," she thought. "He's running away, and he's going to use the side exit near me." She stepped back, trying to hide behind the thick trunk of the willow tree. She didn't want him to see her like this, poor, broken, and pitiful. But Julian didn't head for the exit. He walked straight toward the willow tree. The silence in the garden was absolute. The only sound was the distant crash of waves and the frantic clicking of paparazzi cameras zooming in. Julian stopped 5 feet away from her. He looked different up close. He looked tired. There were fine lines around his eyes that the magazines photoshopped out. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were exactly the same as they were when they were 12 years old, sitting on the dock of the lake, dreaming about the future. Natalie couldn't breathe. The security guard who had harassed her earlier stepped forward, hand on his belt. "Mr. Thorne, is this woman bothering you? I can remove her immediately." Julian didn't even look at the guard. He raised one hand, a silent command to stop. He took another step closer to Natalie. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and rain, washed over her, instantly transporting her back to a lifetime ago. "You came," he said. His voice was hoarse. Natalie's lips trembled. "I promised." "I didn't think you would," he admitted. "After everything my family did to you. After everything I let happen. I didn't think you'd come." "I never break a promise, Julian," she whispered. Tiffany had abandoned the altar. She was storming down the aisle now, her heavy dress dragging on the grass, her face a mask of fury. "Julian, who is this? What is going on?" Julian ignored his bride. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He didn't pull out a diamond ring. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was cheap, something you'd buy at a carnival. Natalie gasped. She involuntarily reached up to her neck, where the matching key used to hang before she had to sell it for food 2 years ago. "You kept it," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "Every day," Julian said. He stepped into a personal space. The entire wedding party was now watching in stunned horror. Tiffany had stopped 10 feet away, panting, her face red. "Julian!" Tiffany shrieked. "Get away from that! That beggar! She's ruining everything!" Julian turned to look at Tiffany. The look on his face was cold, detached, and final. "She isn't ruining anything, Tiffany. She's saving me." He turned back to Natalie. He leaned in close. The microphone clipped to his lapel was still on. He didn't care. He wanted everyone to hear. But for a moment, he lowered his voice so it was intimate. Just for her. "I can't do this, Natalie. I can't marry her. Because for 10 years, I've been trying to find a woman who measures up to you, and she doesn't exist." Then he leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. The crowd strained to hear. The camera zoomed in. He whispered her name. "Natalie." And then he pulled back and spoke into the microphone, his voice booming across the estate. "Everyone, stop the ceremony. There will be no wedding today. But nobody leaves. Because the woman standing here in the grey dress, she has something to say. And I suggest you all listen. Especially you, Mr. St. Clair." Julian took Natalie's hand. It was rough and calloused against his smooth skin. He raised it high in the air. "Natalie," he said, looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Tell them what you found in the archives." Natalie looked at Julian, then at the terrified face of Robert St. Clair, and finally at the 600 people staring at her. The fear evaporated. She wasn't the simple woman in the grey dress anymore. She was the woman holding the match that would burn this kingdom of lies to the ground. She opened her bag. The sound of Natalie's zipper opening on her cheap leather bag echoed through the silent garden like a gunshot. The wind had died down, and the heat of the afternoon felt suddenly oppressive, heavy with the weight of pending disaster. Natalie didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a stack of papers. They were old, yellowed at the edges, and held together by a rusted paperclip. She stepped up to the microphone stand that Julian had lowered for her. She looked out at the sea of faces, the faces of the people who had mocked her father, ostracized her mother, and turned her into a ghost in her own hometown. 15 years ago, Natalie began, her voice trembling slightly before finding its steel core. My father, Thomas Vance, was the CFO of St. Clair Shipping. He was a good man, a man who believed in numbers and truth. And one day, the police came to our house. They arrested him for embezzling $5 million from the company pension fund. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone remembered the Vance scandal. It had been the talk of the Hamptons for a summer. My father died in prison 2 years later, Natalie continued, her eyes locking onto Robert St. Clair. The older man's face had drained of colour, turning a sickly shade of grey. He died of a heart attack, labelled a thief and a liar. And because of the legal fees and the restitution, my mother and I lost everything. Our house, our savings, our name. I went from being Julian's classmate to being the girl who scrubbed floors to pay rent. "This is outrageous," Robert St. Clair bellowed, stepping forward. Veins bulged in his neck. "Security! Get this lunatic out of here! She's slandering me at my daughter's wedding!" 2 guards moved forward, but Julian stepped in front of Natalie. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the guards with a look so terrifyingly calm that they froze in their tracks. Julian Thorne was a man who could dismantle a company with a phone call. Nobody wanted to test him physically. "Let her finish, Robert," Julian said coldly. Natalie held up the top document. "This," she said, "is the original ledger from 2009, the one that was supposed to have been destroyed in the warehouse fire 3 days before my father's trial." Robert St. Clair gasped. The sound was audible over the speakers. "How? Where did you get that?" he stammered, abandoning his denial for shock. "You really should pay your storage unit fees, Mr. St. Clair," Natalie said, a dark satisfaction curling in her gut. "My job at the diner doesn't pay much, so I pick up shifts at the U-Store-Ity facility in Queens. Last month, a unit went up for auction because the owner stopped paying. I bought the contents for $50. Imagine my surprise when I found boxes marked Vance Trial." She flipped the page, holding it up for the cameras that were now broadcasting live to the internet. "My father didn't sign the transfer orders," Natalie declared, her voice rising. "You did. You practiced his signature. I have a notebook here, found in the same box, where you practiced writing Thomas Vance over 100 times. And on the final page, a note to yourself. Transfer complete. Vance takes the fall on Monday." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite murmuring anymore. It was chaos. People were standing on chairs to get a better look. Phones were flashing. The live stream chat rooms were exploding. Tiffany St. Clair looked from Natalie to her father, her beautiful face twisting into a mask of horror. "Daddy, is this true? Tell them it's a lie." Robert St. Clair was shaking. He looked at the exit, then at Julian. "Julian, please, this is a misunderstanding. Business is complicated. We can discuss this in private. Think of the merger. Think of the stock price." Julian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "The merger?" He reached into his own jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up to the microphone. "I just sent an email to the board of directors," Julian announced. "The merger is dead, and I've instructed my legal team to turn over all evidence Natalie has provided to the FBI. The agents are already at the front gate." You traitor!" Tiffany screamed. She lunged at Julian, swinging her bouquet of white orchids like a club. "I was going to be the Queen of New York. You promised me." Julian caught her wrist easily. He looked at her with pity, not anger. "I promised to marry the woman I loved, Tiffany. I never loved you. I was doing what I thought I had to do to save my family's legacy. But Natalie reminded me that a legacy built on lies isn't worth saving." He let go of her hand, and Tiffany collapsed onto the grass, sobbing into her $50,000 dress. But the drama wasn't over. "You think you're so righteous, Julian?" The voice came from the front row. It was sharp, icy, and commanding. Victoria Thorne, Julian's mother, stood up. She smoothed the front of her emerald green silk dress. She didn't look at Natalie. She looked at her son with a disappointment that was colder than the grave. "You foolish boy," Victoria said, walking toward the altar. "You think destroying the St. Clairs washes your hands clean? Who do you think told Robert how to frame Thomas Vance in the first place?" The silence that fell over the Thorne estate was different this time. It wasn't the silence of anticipation or shock. It was the silence of a vacuum, as if all the air had been sucked out of the world. Julian stared at his mother. For the first time, his composure cracked. His mouth opened slightly, his brow furrowing. "What did you say?" Victoria Thorne stopped at the foot of the altar stairs. She looked like a queen surveying a battlefield she had already won years ago. "Oh, stop looking so naive, Julian," she scoffed. "Do you really think Robert St. Clair was smart enough to pull off a pension scheme that complex? The man can barely tie his own shoes without a consultant." She glanced dismissively at the sobbing bride and her trembling father. "Robert came to me in 2009, Victoria continued, addressing the crowd as if she were giving a keynote speech. Thorne Enterprises was bleeding cash. We had made bad bets on the housing market. We needed liquidity, and St. Clair Shipping had it, but they were locked in pension funds. Robert wanted the money for his gambling debts. I needed it to save your inheritance, Julian." Natalie felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. She looked at the woman she had once admired, the woman who had bought her ice cream when she was a child playing with Julian. "So you helped him," Natalie whispered into the microphone. "You helped him destroy my father?" Victoria finally looked at Natalie. Her eyes were devoid of empathy. "Your father was weak, Natalie. He was an accountant with a conscience. He would have reported the discrepancies eventually. He was a liability. We needed a scapegoat. It was efficient." "Efficient!" Julian roared. The sound tore from his throat, raw and agonizing. "You killed him! You killed Thomas! He was like a second father to me." "I saved this family," Victoria shouted back, losing her cool for the first time. "I saved the roof over your head, the cars you drive, the education you received. You think you became a billionaire by playing nice? You stand on a mountain of bodies, Julian. I just made sure you didn't have to see them." Julian looked at his mother as if she were a monster wearing a human skin. He stepped back, physically recoiling from her. He looked at Natalie, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading sorrow. "I didn't know," he choked out. "Natalie, I swear to God, I didn't know. I thought your father was guilty. I stayed away from you because I was ashamed that my mentor was a thief. I didn't know it was us. I didn't know we were the thieves." Natalie looked at him. She saw the 12-year-old boy again, the one who used to cry when he found an injured bird. She knew he was telling the truth. Julian was ruthless in business, but he wasn't cruel. He was a pawn in his mother's game, just like she had been. "I believe you," Natalie said softly. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder by the second. The flashing lights of police cruisers could be seen through the tall hedges at the end of the driveway. Victoria Thorne didn't run. She simply checked her diamond watch. "It seems the festivities are coming to an end," she said dryly. She turned to the guests, many of whom were her close friends. "I expect I'll be uninvited from the bridge club, Karen." She looked back at Julian. "You've destroyed everything I built, Julian. I hope she's worth it." Julian reached out and took Natalie's hand. He gripped it tight, as if she were the only solid thing left in a dissolving world. "She's worth more than everything you have," Julian said. The police swarmed the garden. It was a scene of absolute pandemonium. Officers in tactical gear were arresting Robert St. Clair, who was weeping and pointing fingers at Victoria. Other officers were gently escorting a shell-shocked Tiffany away. When they approached Victoria Thorne, she held out her wrists. "Mind the silk," she warned the officer. "It's vintage." Amidst the chaos, the flashing lights, and the screaming guests, Julian and Natalie stood alone under the willow tree. Julian turned to her. He looked stripped bare. The arrogant billionaire was gone. "I have nothing," he said. "The company will collapse after this. My assets will be frozen. My name is Mud. I am the son of a criminal." Natalie looked at his tuxedo, then down at her frayed grey dress. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes for the first time in 10 years. "Well," she said, "I have a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens with a very comfortable pull-out couch, and I make excellent grilled cheese sandwiches." Julian let out a breathy, tearful laugh. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Natalie agreed, "but you promised to be my friend forever. And unlike some people, I expect you to keep your promises." Julian lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, right over a small scar she had gotten from a hot fryer at the diner. "Let's get out of here," he said. "Wait," Natalie said. She reached into her bag one last time. "There's one more thing." Julian froze. "Please tell me it's not another felony indictment." "No," Natalie said. She pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter. The paper was blue, St. Clair stationery, but the handwriting wasn't Robert's, and it wasn't Victoria's. "I found this at the bottom of the box," Natalie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's dated 3 weeks ago. It's from Tiffany." Julian frowned. "Tiffany? To who?" "To you," Natalie said, "but she never sent it." She handed the letter to Julian. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Julian, I know you don't love me. I know you're only doing this for the merger. But you need to know something before we say I do. I'm pregnant, and it's not yours." Julian stared at the paper. The world, which had already turned upside down, seemed to spin off its axis entirely. She was trapping me, Julian realized, horror dawning on him. If the merger failed, she was going to use the baby to claim the Thorne estate anyway. "It gets worse," Natalie said. "Read the bottom." Julian looked at the postscript. "I don't know what to do. Chad says we should keep it, that once we're married, you'll never know. But I'm scared." "Chad?" Julian whispered. He looked around the chaotic garden. "My best man." He looked toward the drink station. Chad, the slick banker who had patted his pockets for the ring earlier, was currently trying to sneak away through the catering tent. "He knew," Julian said, his voice hardening again. "He knew everything. The fraud, the baby. He was playing me the whole time." "Everyone was playing you, Julian," Natalie said gently. "Everyone, except the people they made you leave behind." Julian crumpled the note in his fist. He looked at Natalie, and the look in his eyes changed. The sadness was replaced by a fierce determination. "They took 15 years from us," he said. "They took your father. They took my integrity. I'm not letting them take one more second." He grabbed Natalie's hand. "Run." "What? Run with me?" Julian said, a wild grin breaking onto his face. "The press is blocking the driveway. The police are blocking the gates. But I know a way out. Do you remember the old service tunnel under the wine cellar? The one we used to sneak into the kitchen for midnight snacks?" Natalie laughed. "You fit in that tunnel when you were 12. You're 6'2" now." "We'll make it fit," Julian said. "Or we'll die trying. Better than staying here." Natalie looked at the chaos behind them, the ruined wedding, the arrested parents, the screaming bride. Then she looked at Julian. "Okay," she said. They kicked off their shoes, her cheap flats, his Italian leather Oxfords, and they ran. Hand in hand, they sprinted across the perfect lawn, dodging police officers and cameramen, heading for the basement doors of the estate, laughing like children, leaving the ruins of their old lives behind them. But as they disappeared into the darkness of the cellar, neither of them noticed the figure standing on the balcony of the guest house, watching them through a pair of high-powered binoculars. A figure who wasn't in handcuffs, a figure who had just made a phone call. "Target is on the move," the figure whispered. "Execute Plan B." The tunnel smelled of damp earth, vintage wine, and rotting wood. It was narrow, lined with cobwebs that clung to Julian's tuxedo and Natalie's hair like sticky ghosts. "I can't believe this is still here," Natalie panted, her hand gripping Julian's tightly. The only light came from the flashlight function on Julian's phone, casting erratic, dancing beams on the mouldy brick walls. "I used to hide down here when my parents fought," Julian admitted, his voice echoing in the cramped space. "I thought it was my secret kingdom. Turns out it was just a drainage pipe for the wine cellar." They ran until their lungs burned. The tunnel sloped upward, the air growing saltier. Finally, they reached a rusted iron grate. Julian threw his shoulder against it. It groaned, resisting for a moment before screeching open. They spilled out onto the rocky beach below the Thorne Estate cliffs. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. Above them, The chaos of the wedding was a distant hum, drowned out by the crashing Atlantic waves. "Where do we go?" Natalie asked, shivering as the ocean wind cut through her thin cotton dress. "You said you had a plan." "I said I knew a way out," Julian corrected, scanning the coastline. "The plan is currently being improvised." He looked up the beach. About a quarter-mile down, a small, weathered boat shack stood on stilts. "Old man McGregor's shack," Julian said. "He used to be the groundskeeper. He kept an old Ford pickup truck behind that shed. He passed away last year, but the estate hasn't cleared the property yet." "Stealing a truck?" Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Is this the same Julian Thorne who wouldn't jaywalk when we were 10? "Desperate times," Julian grimaced. They sprinted across the sand, the loose grains filling their shoes. When they reached the shack, luck, or perhaps fate, was on their side. The rusted blue 1985 Ford F-150 was there, covered in a tarp. Julian checked the wheel well. McGregor always left the key on the tire. His fingers brushed metal. He pulled out a single, rusty key. "Got it." They scrambled inside. The cab smelled of stale tobacco and motor oil. It was a far cry from the leather-seated limousines Julian was used to. He turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. "Come on," Julian pleaded, pumping the gas pedal. "Don't do this to me." He tried again. The engine roared to life with a sound like a dying tractor. "Yes!" Natalie cheered. Julian threw the truck into reverse, backing out onto the gravel access road. But just as he shifted into drive, a blinding light flooded the cab. A black Range Rover with tinted windows had pulled onto the access road, blocking their path. The high beams were blinding. "Who is that?" Natalie shielded her eyes. "Not the police," Julian said, his voice tight. "The police use sirens. That's private security." The Range Rover accelerated, heading straight for them in a game of chicken. "Hold on!" Julian yelled. He didn't brake. He yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The old Ford careened off the road, bouncing violently over a ditch and crashing through a wooden fence. Natalie screamed as they went airborne for a terrifying second before landing in a field of tall corn. "Go, go, go!" Natalie shouted. Julian floored it. The truck tore through the stalks, creating a path of destruction. Behind them, the Range Rover struggled to follow, its low chassis getting caught on the uneven terrain. They burst out of the cornfield and onto the main highway, tires screeching. Julian didn't let up. He wove through the evening traffic, running 2 red lights, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. "I think we lost them," he said, after 10 minutes of silence. Natalie was clutching the dashboard, her face pale. "Julian, those men, they had guns. I saw the silhouette when they flashed the lights. Who sends armed men to a wedding?" Julian's face was grim. "My mother doesn't do anything by half measures, but she's in handcuffs, which means someone else is pulling the strings now." "Who?" "I don't know," Julian said, "but we can't go to my apartment. We can't go to yours. They'll be watching everything." "I have an aunt," Natalie said suddenly. "Aunt Beatrice. She lives in New Jersey, in a town called Vineland. She hates your family. She hasn't spoken to me since the scandal, but she hates the Thornes more than she hates me. She might help." Julian looked at the gas gauge. It was half full. "New Jersey it is." As they crossed the Verrazzano Bridge, leaving the island of wealth and treachery behind, Julian's phone buzzed on the seat between them. It wasn't a call. It was a text message from an unknown number. Julian glanced at it, and the blood drained from his face. "What is it?" Natalie asked. Julian handed her the phone. The message was short, brutal, and terrifying. "Plan A failed. Plan B is in effect. Check the news, Mr. Thorne. You aren't the hero of this story anymore." The Motel 6 on the outskirts of Vineland, New Jersey, was the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found. The neon sign buzzed ominously, the M flickering on and off. Julian paid for the room with cash, the $300 Natalie had in her emergency stash in her bag. His credit cards were useless. He knew they would be tracked the moment he swiped them. Room 104 was small, smelling of lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes. There were 2 twin beds with polyester spreads in a garish floral pattern. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, his tuxedo jacket discarded on the floor, his tie undone. He looked utterly defeated. The adrenaline of the escape had worn off, leaving behind a crushing weight of reality. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his head in his hands. "I dragged you into this. You should have just stayed at the wedding. You'd be safe." Natalie was busy filling the ice bucket from the machine outside. She came back in, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. "I wouldn't be safe, Julian. I'd be miserable," she said firmly. She sat next to him. "And you didn't drag me." "I walked. Actually, we ran." She reached out and touched his shoulder. "We need to see what that text meant. Turn on the TV." Julian picked up the remote with a shaking hand. He found a 24-hour news channel. The headline made Natalie gasp. "Breaking news. Billionaire Groom wanted for murder and embezzlement." The screen showed a photo of Julian, not a flattering one, but a shot taken from a security camera where he looked angry. The anchorwoman's voice was grave. "Authorities are currently searching for Julian Thorne, the CIO of Thorne Enterprises. Following the dramatic interruption of his wedding today, new evidence has surfaced, implicating Mr. Thorne in the death of St. Clair Shipping's former CFO, Thomas Vance, 15 years ago." "What?" Natalie stood up, shouting at the TV. "That's a lie. He was 12. The report continued. Documents released anonymously to the press just moments ago suggest that while Victoria Thorne and Robert St. Clair orchestrated the financial fraud, the order to silence Thomas Vance came from a trust fund account registered to Julian Thorne. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne is accused of siphoning $50 million from the company accounts into an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands earlier this morning. Julian stared at the screen, his mouth open in horror. I didn't move any money. I don't even have access to those accounts without board approval." "They're framing you," Natalie realized. "That's plan B. They knew you might get cold feet. They knew you might expose them. So they set up a contingency. If the merger fails, you take the fall for everything. Your mother, she threw you to the wolves." "No," Julian said, his eyes narrowing. "My mother is evil, but she's possessive. She wouldn't frame me. She wants me to run the empire, not rot in jail. This isn't her." "Then who?" Julian stood up and paced the small room. "Who has access to the trust codes? Who has the authority to move $50 million in a morning? Who benefits if I'm out of the way?" He stopped. He looked at Natalie, a realization dawning on him that was colder than ice. "The lawyer," he said. "Grant Sterling." "The family fixer?" Natalie asked. "The one you said handles the messy stuff?" "He's not just the fixer," Julian said, his mind racing. "He's the executor of the estate. If I go to prison, and my mother goes to prison, control of Thorne Enterprises falls to a court-appointed trustee until the litigation is settled. And guess who the designated trustee is in the corporate bylaws?" "Sterling," Natalie whispered. "He gets control of billions," Julian said. "He's been playing all of us. He probably encouraged my mother to do the fraud years ago. He probably helped Robert cook the books. He's been waiting for us to destroy each other so he could walk in and take the crown. It was a perfect trap. Julian was now a fugitive, hated by the public, hunted by the police, and framed by a man who knew every secret the family had. "We have to go to the police," Natalie said. "We have to tell them it's Sterling." "With what proof?" Julian countered bitterly. "The documents I exposed at the wedding implicate my mother and Robert. The documents Sterling leaked implicate me. It's his word against a fugitive's, and he has $50 million to buy the best legal defense in the world. I have—" He checked his pockets. $17 and a stolen truck. The room fell silent. The hum of the vending machine outside seemed deafening. "We don't need money," Natalie said slowly. "We need the one thing Sterling doesn't know we have." "What's that?" "We know where the bodies are buried," Natalie said. "Figuratively. You said Sterling handles the messy stuff. That means he keeps records. Men like that always keep insurance." "His archives," Julian said. "He keeps a private server at his penthouse in Manhattan. It's off the grid, air-gapped. If there's proof of his involvement, it's there." "Manhattan?" Natalie looked at the news ticker, which was showing police roadblocks on the George Washington Bridge. "Going back into the city is suicide, Julian. Every cop in New York is looking for you." "Then we don't go as Julian Thorne and Natalie Vance," Julian said, a spark of his old confidence returning. "We need disguises. We need a plan. And we need to break into the most secure penthouse in the Upper East Side." Natalie looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the boy she had loved for 15 years, the boy who was brave enough to stand up to bullies, even when he was scared. "Okay," she said. "But first, we need to do something about your hair. You look too much like a billionaire." She went to the bathroom and came back with a pair of cheap nail scissors she had found in her bag. "I'm going to cut it," she said. "And we're going to dye it with—" She looked around. "Hydrogen peroxide from the first aid kit." Julian sat on the chair. "Do your worst." As Natalie began to snip away the perfectly styled locks of the former CEO, Julian's phone rang again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call, ID blocked. Julian held up a hand. He answered it on speaker. "Hello? Mr. Thorne?" A smooth, cultured voice purred. It was Grant Sterling. "I see you made it to New Jersey. Vineland is lovely this time of year." Julian froze. "How did you know?" "I know everything, Julian. I'm tracking the GPS on the burner phone Natalie bought 3 years ago." "Did you really think I wouldn't have tabs on the girl who could ruin everything?" Natalie covered her mouth. "What do you want, Grant?" Julian snarled. "I want you to surrender," Sterling said calmly. "Walk into the nearest police station, confess to the embezzlement, take the fall. Do that, and I'll make sure you get a light sentence. Minimum security. Tennis courts. And if I don't? If you don't—" Sterling paused. The sound of a car door opening could be heard in the background. "Well, I currently have a team outside a nursing home in Queens. Specifically, the Shady Pines Retirement Home. Room 302. Natalie's blood ran cold. She grabbed the phone. "Leave my mother alone." "Ah, Miss Vance," Sterling said pleasantly. "Your mother is quite frail, isn't she? It would be a shame if the stress of her daughter's criminal activities caused her heart to give out." "You touch her and I'll kill you," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You have 12 hours, Julian," Sterling said. "Surrender by noon tomorrow, or Natalie becomes an orphan. Again." The line went dead. Natalie dropped to her knees, sobbing. "He has my mum. Julian, he has my mum." Julian knelt beside her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she shook. He looked at the phone, then at the scissors on the floor. "We aren't surrendering," Julian said, his voice hard as steel. "We're going to Manhattan. Tonight. But the time—" We don't have 12 hours, Julian said. We have to strike before he expects us. We're going to rob Grant Sterling, and then we're going to burn his life to the ground. The New York skyline loomed over them like a jagged set of teeth, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement at 2 a.m. Julian Thorne and Natalie Vance stood in the delivery bay shadows of The Pinnacle, the 90-story glass needle where Grant Sterling lived, like a modern-day emperor. They looked nothing like the polished figures from the Hamptons. Their hair was dyed a rough, matte black with shoe polish, and they wore grease-stained mechanic jumpsuits stolen from a 24-hour garage in Jersey. The service elevator code hasn't changed in 5 years, Julian whispered, his voice tight. Sterling is a creature of habit. He thinks he's untouchable. They slipped past the biometric scanner, using a high-resolution photo Julian had printed, a trick that only worked on older systems, a flaw Julian knew because his company had installed it. The elevator ride was agonizing. Every floor they passed felt like a countdown to execution. Julian checked his watch. They had less than 4 hours before Sterling's deadline expired, before he made the call to the hitman waiting at Natalie's mother's nursing home. When the doors slid open into the penthouse utility room, the silence was deafening. They crept into the study, a cavernous room lined with stolen artifacts. Julian went straight to the bookshelf, pulling a leather-bound copy of Dante's Inferno. The wall clicked and swung open, revealing the hum of a hidden server room. Jackpot, Julian breathed, plugging in a decrypting drive. Every bribe, every fake ledger, every email to my mother. It's all here. The download bar crawled across the screen. 80%, 90%. Suddenly, a red prompt flashed. Enter passphrase. He has a dead man switch, Julian panicked. If I don't guess it in 10 seconds, the drive wipes itself. Think, Natalie urged. What does he love? Himself? Money? Julian typed gold. Access denied. 5 seconds. Natalie's eyes darted to a framed photo on the desk, not of a person, but of an old golden retriever. It was the only thing Sterling had ever shown affection for. The dog, try Barnaby. Julian's fingers flew. Barnaby. Access granted. Got it, Julian exhaled, yanking the drive. Touching sentiment, a voice drawled from the doorway. Grant Sterling stood there, a silk dressing gown wrapped around him, a suppressed pistol leveled at Julian's chest. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored. I expected you sooner, Julian. The dye job is tacky, by the way. It's over, Grant, Julian said, stepping in front of Natalie. I have the files. The police are on their way. Sterling laughed, a cold, dry sound. The police work for me. Commissioner Higgins is on my payroll. Hand over the drive, or I'll kill you both and claim self-defense against intruders. He pulled out his phone with his free hand. And just to be thorough, I think I'll call my associate at Shady Pines. Natalie's mother has lived long enough. Natalie screamed, lunging forward, but Julian held her back. His face was strangely calm. You can't make that call, Grant. Sterling frowned, tapping his screen. What? I didn't just bring a hard drive, Julian said, pulling a small black box from his pocket. I brought a military-grade signal jammer. No cellular, no Wi-Fi. You're ghosted. Sterling's composure cracked. His face twisted into a snarl. Then I'll just kill you first, turn it off, and make the call. He tightened his finger on the trigger. Crash. The floor-to-ceiling window behind Sterling shattered into 1,000,000 diamonds. 2 figures in black tactical gear swung through on repelling lines, laser sights instantly painting Sterling's chest red. FBI, drop the weapon! The front door burst open, and a dozen agents swarmed the room, led by Agent Rossi. Sterling dropped the gun, stunned. The FBI? Sterling stammered as they slammed him against the desk. You went to the feds? Local police are on your payroll, Julian said, holding Natalie close. But Agent Rossi has been hunting you for a decade. The jammer blocked your signal, Grant, not the wire I'm wearing. As they dragged a screaming Sterling away, Agent Rossi nodded to Natalie. We picked up the hitman at the nursing home 10 minutes ago. Your mother is safe. Natalie collapsed into Julian's arms, the adrenaline finally leaving her body, replaced by the warmth of survival. 6 months later, the snow fell softly on the small, rustic barn in upstate New York. There were no helicopters, no paparazzi, and no six-figure ice sculptures. Julian stood at the altar, but he wasn't the stiff, miserable billionaire from the Hamptons. He wore a simple suit, his hair its natural brown, his eyes crinkling with a smile that reached his soul. The guests were the people who actually mattered, staff from the diner, Natalie's friends, and in the front row, Natalie's mother, cheering from her wheelchair. Natalie walked down the aisle in a vintage cream dress she had altered herself. She didn't look like a simple woman anymore. She looked like a queen who had conquered her kingdom. I promised I'd be there, Julian whispered as he took her hands. I just took the long way around. You kept your promise? Natalie smiled, tears streaming down her face. You came back. When they kissed, the small barn erupted in cheers that were louder and more genuine than any applause at the Thorne estate. They walked out into the crisp winter air, hand in hand. So, Julian asked, opening the door to an old, restored Ford pickup truck, the same one they had escaped in. Paris? The Maldives? Natalie laughed, tossing her bouquet into the crowd. Drive, she said. Let's just drive. Julian started the engine. It roared to life, not with the purr of a luxury car, but with the rumble of freedom. As they drove off into the falling snow, they left the billions behind, knowing they had found the only fortune that really mattered. What a journey! From the heartbreaking humiliation at the wedding to the high-stakes heist in the Manhattan penthouse, Julian and Natalie proved that true loyalty is worth more than all the billions in the world. They stripped away the lies, the wealth, and the status to find the love that had been waiting for them for 15 years. It makes you wonder, how many people in our own lives are wearing masks just to survive? And would you have the courage to stand up against your own family to do what is right, just like Julian did? I want to know what you think. Was Julian's mother, Victoria, irredeemable, or was she just a victim of her own greed? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a shocking historical romance coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.